Hello and welcome. I'm Aman Soni and I'll be discussing with you a very basic yet very advanced topic with you. So you'll be wondering why sir is discussing a very basic topic which is GDP of India. First of all, whether India's GDP is going up, whether India's GDP is going down, does it even impact you? Are you worried when India's GDP growth rate goes down? Are you very happy when the GDP growth rate goes up? Let's discuss it. By the way, what is GDP? GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced by the factors of production in a period of one financial year. The point is, if GDP of India goes up, would your income go up? Or is it reverse? That your income is going up, so GDP of India is going up. So point is, if your income is going up, then only India's GDP would go up. So if India's GDP is going down, it means your income is going down. So you need to be worried about it. So hence the whole thing. GDP growth rate, does it impact you? Yes, GDP growth rate impacts us because GDP growth rate, it actually tells where are we heading, where I am heading, where are you heading, where are our neighbors, where are our relatives heading. So why I'm discussing this topic with you? Because Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, it has brought the first advanced estimate for the year 24-25. So 3-4 things. MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, it has brought first advanced estimates. Look, we are still in the year of 24-25. It's still yet to be completed. The financial year of 24-25 is yet to be done. It will be completed by 31st of March. And here in the month of Jan, MOSPI is saying that our GDP would be just rupees 325 lakh crore rupees. It's called advanced estimates because we are yet in the year. We do not know what's going to happen in the month of Feb. We don't know what's going to happen in the month of January, February, March. But yet, the MOSPI is saying India's GDP will be growing by 6.4%. GDP would be 3.25 lakh crore rupees. It may happen, it may not happen. That's why it's called estimates. And we are putting up in advance, hence called advanced estimates. And we are doing it for the first time, hence called first advanced estimates. We may bring multiple estimates again, but it's the first time we are doing it, hence called first advanced estimates. Now, how does it bring first advanced estimate? Depending upon the performance of the country in the last 6 months, say from April to October, November, what has been India's performance in these 6 months? Based on that, MOSPI would be extrapolating the performance in the remaining 5-6 months. So based on that, MOSPI is giving a data that our GDP will be growing by 6.4%. So first of all, how much is India's GDP? Yes, how much is India's GDP? So you would be saying, sir, $3 trillion, $4 trillion. India's GDP, will it be in rupees or will it be in dollars? So you go outside from here, you are sitting in your place and then you go outside. You go outside and you want to have a tikki, you want to have a samosa, you want to have a pastry. You tell him, bhaiya ek samosa de do. What would he say? $1, 50 cents? Or he would say, sir, 20 rupees ka hai, 20 rupees. So if it is India's GDP, and what is GDP? Market value of final goods and services produced. So market value of final goods and services produced in India ought to be in rupees. So India's GDP is rupees 325 lakh crore. That's the estimate as per MOSPI. That's what would be India's GDP by March. And if we take it, but point is, if India's GDP is in lakh crore rupees, USA's GDP would be in dollar. China's GDP would be in yuan, Japanese GDP would be in yen. How do we compare? We need to compare the countries also, right? So point is, all countries, they have their GDPs in their own currencies, but for international comparison, they convert their GDPs into international international currency, say dollar. So if we take the current exchange rate, $1 equal to 85 rupees, India's GDP comes out at $3.8 trillion. And if we take the exchange rate of 2014, which was $1 equal to 61, if we go by that, India's GDP comes out at $5.3 trillion. Now here comes into picture our next concept. We are discussing current affairs, we are discussing concepts also. So here comes into picture next concept, that is nominal GDP and real GDP. Now, nominal GDP is GDP calculated at current year's price. So if we go by 24-25 prices, the GDP comes out at $3.8 trillion. Alright. Now, nominal GDP, what did I tell? GDP calculated at current year's price. So nominal GDP, it would increase as compared to GDP of previous year. What I'm saying is, nominal GDP of 24-25, 23, 24, 25, April, March. This year. So GDP of 24-25, it is increasing as compared to GDP of 23-24 by 9.7%. Now point is, nominal GDP of 24-25, it will increase as compared to nominal GDP of 23-24. It can happen because of two reasons. First, the production increases, and second, because the prices increase. So nominal GDP will increase as nominal GDP of current year 24-25 would increase as compared to nominal GDP of 23-24 if the production increases or the prices increase. If we go by that, then nominal GDP of 24-25 has increased by 9.7%. And when we say India's GDP is rupees 3.25 lakh crore rupees, that time I am talking about nominal GDP, 325 lakh crore rupees. But what is more important for us is the GDP increasing. What is more important for us is the contribution of production in case of GDP. If the prices are increasing, that's not leading to increase in my purchasing power. If prices are increasing, if GDP is increasing because of increase in prices, then it's not contributing to my increase, then it's not contributing to increase in my purchasing power. It's not contributing to increasing my standard of living. My standard of living would increase, my income would increase only when the production increases. Okay. So if I'm a vegetable seller, my income would increase if I'm selling more vegetables. But if I'm selling the same amount of vegetables at higher price, yes, my income would increase, but at the same time, I would be buying inputs at a higher price. So my net income would still be same. So my income, what's more important for me, what's more important for the country is that how much is the increase because of increase in production. And so we need to remove the impact of increase in prices from the nominal GDP. Here comes into picture our next concept, which is real GDP. Sorry. So here comes into picture our next concept, which is real GDP. So if we talk about real GDP of India, India's real GDP is rupees 185 lakh crore rupees. We have written over here. It removes the impact of inflation from nominal GDP. So India's real GDP is approximately half of its nominal GDP. And that's where the article becomes relevant now. I have discussed the concept till now. Now I come onto the article. We come onto the publication which was given by Mosby 2-3 days back. That India's real GDP growth rate is 6.4%, expected to be 6.4% in 24-25. And this growth rate of 6.4%, it is the lowest in the last 4 years. 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, 24-25. That is the years after COVID. We have grown at the lowest pace. And if we see the GDP data of quarter 2, 24-25, quarter 2, April, May, June, quarter 1, July, August, September, quarter 2. ठीक है, तो 24, 25, April, May, June, July, August, September. I'm talking about this quarter. In this quarter, the growth rate has been just 5.4% as compared to the same quarter of previous year. And if we talk about growth rate of this quarter, the growth rate was 6.7%. So it means the growth rate of Indian economy has gone down. You see this, you see the data. This is since COVID. In COVID, the growth rate was minus 5.8%. The GDP reduced. We had a recession. 21-22, the growth rate was high. This growth rate was high because of a low base. It was base effect that the GDP of 2021 was very less. Hence, even a small increase appeared to be bigger. That's what is called base effect. So in 21-22, the GDP increased by 9.7%, then 7%, 8.2%. So if we see these last 4 years, in the last 4 years, this growth rate is the least. So that's why it is said. So now let's talk about this. That what are the reasons for it? Why is the growth rate coming down? There have been multiple reasons. There have been multiple reasons given for the same. First reason which is being given is we are going through a cyclical slowdown. What is the cyclical slowdown? Look, if we plot time and GDP growth rate, it would never happen that GDP growth rate is continuously going up. It would also never happen that the GDP growth rate is continuously going down. What would happen is that if we plot GDP growth rate and time, the growth rate would go up, would go down, would go up, would go down, would go up, would go down. So hence the growth rate, the period which we had seen is we had seen higher growth rates. Now we are on the going down. It's normal, it's cyclical. Other reason is strong base effect. The point is, in these years, 22-23, 21-22, 22-23, 23-24, the growth rate was high. Hence, we cannot have the same growth rate now. I'll explain it. You won't understand it. Suppose the GDP was 100, then GDP became 110. The growth rate is 10%. But now if it increases to 120, the growth is still 10. But this would appear to be, say, around 9%. So this is because this base is bigger. As this base is bigger, the same growth would appear to be smaller. So as the GDP of the previous years, the growth rate of previous years was high, now the growth rate would appear to be less, hence the concept of strong base effect. Then we had general elections in the year 24, and because of the general elections, the government restrained its expenditure. The public investment it reduced. The public investment did not happen as much as it should have. Hence, general elections were also responsible. And as there was hardly any public investment, even private investments, private capital expenditure also came down. And since 2022, we have seen monetary tightening. The repo rate is consistently 6.5%. There have been calls to reduce the repo rate, but still the repo rate hasn't been reduced. So even the monetary tightening is also responsible for this. Fiscal tightening is also, there is hardly any tax soaps given by the government in the budget. So all are the reasons why we are going through this slowdown. Now, this is some data to tell it. That if we see the growth rate from 2014 to 7.4%, and then from 15-16 it came down 8%, 8.3, 6.8, 6.5. Important is 2019-20, 4%. So even in 19-20 we were going through a cyclical slowdown, and then in 2021 we had COVID, so GDP came down. And now, then GDP grew again. Now the GDP is coming down again. I'm not saying GDP is coming down again, the GDP growth rate is coming down again. So GDP growth rate was high, GDP growth rate came down. further came down, recession, GDP growth rate went up, and then gradually the growth rate has come down. All right. So if you see since 1991, the growth rate of Indian economy has been at 6.8% on an average per annum. And if we see the compounded annual growth rate since 1920, the growth rate is 4.8%. So whatever was the growth rate since 1991 to 2020, as compared to that, the growth rate has come down. So point is, there are two things. One is that yes, we are through a cyclical slowdown, but at the same time, since 2014-15 to 2024, the growth rate has overall come down. And further in the last 5 years, the growth rate on an average has come down as compared to what it had been in the last 20 years. So we are not just going through a period of slowdown in 24-25. Here we are comparing the years. If we compare the periods, say decades, again in this last 5-6 years, the growth rate has come down. So now let's analyze what's the reason for that. So what is holding back India's GDP? Why is India's GDP not growing? Multiple reasons. If you see if you remember GDP expenditure formula, it is GDP expenditure is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. C stands for consumption, also called as private final consumption expenditure. I is investment, also called as GFCF, gross fixed capital formation. G is government expenditure on purchase of goods and services. X minus M is net exports. So point is, if in 1 year we are spending 100 rupees, the whole country is spending 100 rupees. That's what is GDP expenditure method. If the whole country is spending 100 rupees, out of that, on consumption 60 rupees are spent, on investment 30 rupees are spent, on government expenditure 10 rupees are spent, hardly any contribution from this. They almost nullify each other. So now point is, the largest contributor to GDP comes from consumption, then investment, then government expenditure, right? Now, let's analyze each of these components. Let us see how C or I or G or X minus M are faring in the last 1 or 2 years. If we talk about C, then if growth rate of consumption goes down, GDP is equal to this plus this plus this plus this. So if this component goes down, or this component goes down, or this component goes down, the GDP would go down. Or the growth rate of this goes down, the growth rate of this goes down, the growth rate of this goes down, then its growth rate goes down. I hope you can understand this mathematical part, right? Now, so if the growth rate of C goes down, it would pull overall GDP down. At the same time, if consumption is going down, it means the private entrepreneurs are not going to invest. That would reduce the incentive of private investment also. So if C goes down now, after some time, I would also go down. And if we talk about C's growth rate, consumption's growth rate since 1920 is around 4.8%. So obviously, if growth rate of biggest component is 4.8%, the growth rate of overall GDP would also be around that. So the reason why India's growth rate is coming down is because the consumption is going down. That actually shows the overall demand in the economy is going down, right? That's what because of C. If I talk about I, let's talk about G first. If I talk about government expenditure, in 24-25, the growth rate was 4.2%. Since 1920, it is 3.1%. G is like a small contribution, won't impact much, but what is more important is government can bring growth. If government can spend money, then government can bring growth. But to spend money, government needs to have money. If it doesn't have money, it can borrow and spend. That's what I've written. Government can borrow and spend. But government is also bounded by the FRBM Act, the fiscal glide path. Government is onto a path of fiscal consolidation. It's trying to bring down its fiscal deficit. Hence, government restrains itself from spending. Third component is investment. So if I talk about 24-25, the growth rate of investment is 6.3%. Longer period, the growth rate is 5.3%. I'll tell you one thing. In 23-24, the growth rate of investment was 23-24%. The growth rate of investment has come down. So the growth rate of investment would come down. Actually, there's a concept called crowding out impact. Crowding out means public investment, it attracts private investment. So if public investment would go down, the private investment would also go down. Because of general elections, the investment went down. Because of that, the private investment also went down. So if public investment would go down, private investment would go down. If investment would go down, it means the employment opportunities would also go down. Employment opportunities goes down, it means the demand goes down, it means the consumption also goes down. So public investment not growing that much is also a reason for the consumption not going up, consumption going down. You see, in the year 1920, the growth rate of investment was just 1%, and that actually shows this. That why was India's GDP growth rate just 4% in 1920? When the investment is not there, how can we expect the GDP to go up, right? Now, the point is, consumption is going around by 5%, investment is also growing around by 5%. So if most of the components, whether it is consumption and investment, they contribute 90%, right? So if both these components are going up by 5%, how can the GDP grow more than 5%? X minus M, net exports, there is hardly any contribution. Important thing is, X minus M is seeing a negative growth rate since 1920. What's the meaning of negative growth rate? It means in the last 5 years, the gap between imports and exports is reducing. Now, exports are gradually going up, imports are gradually coming down, so the gap is reducing. In this all discussion, what we have seen is that the positive thing about India is that in the last 5 years, India is the fastest growing major economy. That's the positive thing. If I talk about negative thing, the reason for this higher growth rate is the low base effect of the low base of 2021. The growth rate was less, hence overall growth rate came out to be higher. Moreover, negative thing is since 1920, the average growth rate is just 4.8%. We have a target of becoming a developed country by 2047. And if we have to grow, if we want to be a developed country by 2047, that is after 100 years of independence, then we need to grow around by 9.5-10%. And the growth rate is just 4.8%, which is just half of what is required. Why are we discussing it? We are discussing it because budget of 25-26 is on the horizon. We need to see, the industry wants to see what's the new budget going to bring. Is the government going to continue on the path of fiscal consolidation, or the government is going to recognize that we are on a slowdown in 24-25? Moreover, we are in a period of slowdown since 2021 till now as compared to the last 20 years. Is the government going to focus more on growth, or is the government going to focus more on fiscal consolidation? All these things will become clear when the government brings its budget on 1st of Feb. Till then, bye-bye, see you.